too. I hope you're having a fantastic day. Now, we've finished our Fantastic Mr. Fox book, so I'm going to start a brand new one today, and it's called Here's the Naughtiest Girl. It's Enid Blyton. Right, chapter 1, Back at Whiteleaf School. It was the summer term at Whiteleaf School. All the children were back again: Elizabeth, Julian, Harry, John, Martin, Rosemary, and the rest. They rushed around the school excitedly, glad to be back. Summer term, my favourite term, said Elizabeth Allen, pleased. Hi, Julian, come and look at my new tennis racket. Julian came over, humming a little song. His green eyes twinkled at Elizabeth. Hello, he said. What are you going to be this term, Elizabeth? Naughtiest girl in the school? Best girl? Silliest? Elizabeth laughed and gave Julian a punch. I'm a monitor, as you jolly well know, she said. I'm going to do my best and be a monitor all the term, not be chucked out in the middle, as I was last term. What about you? Oh, I'm going to do my best too, but I've got all sorts of bests, said Julian, grinning. I'll beat you at work this term, for one thing, and I'll beat you at tennis, and I'll beat you at thinking out a few little tricks to make life cheerful, and... Oh, Julian, I hope you'll think of a few tricks, said Elizabeth. But please don't put sneezing powder in the pages of my books again. Honestly, it's awful to have to keep on sneezing without stopping. Right, said Julian, I'll make a note of it. Elizabeth was just going to say something more when she caught sight of a boy in the distance. He was so like Julian that she stared in surprise. Some black untidy hair, some same green eyes, but what a sulky face. Look, there's somebody who looks very like you, said Elizabeth. He must be a new boy. Julian turned. Yes, that's a cousin of mine. He's got rather a big opinion of himself, as you'll soon find out, but he didn't want to come to Whiteleaf School at all. Why ever not, said Elizabeth, who simply couldn't imagine anyone not wanting to come. Well, he's not very fond of me, said Julian. He doesn't like people who can do things better than he can, and he'll be in our form. And when you use your brains, you'll be top whenever you want to, said Elizabeth, even top of me. That's easy, said Julian, and got another punch. But quite seriously, Elizabeth goes slow with Patrick. He can be very spiteful. Don't play the heavy monitor with him too soon or too much. I shall tick him off if he doesn't toe the line, said Elizabeth at once. How will he behave, do you think? A bit like you behaved when you first came, said Julian, twinkling at her. Don't you remember? You were the naughtiest girl in the school, and you meant to be too. The things you did. Elizabeth went bright pink. You needn't keep reminding me of that first term, she said. I was awful. I just can't think how I could have behaved like that. Well, I wasn't there then, said Julian, but I've heard plenty about it. I bet you'll always be known as the naughtiest girl, even if you go on being a monitor for the rest of your school days and end up as a head girl. Gosh, I'd never be that, said Elizabeth. Whoever heard of a naughtiest girl ending up as a head? Here comes your cousin, Julian. Julian swung round. Hello, Patrick, he said, finding your way about a bit. This is Elizabeth. She's a friend of mine, and if you want any help with anything, go to her, because she's a monitor. I'm not likely to go to any friend of yours for help, said Patrick in a high and mighty voice. And, by the way, you don't need to spread around the news that I'm your cousin. I'm not really proud of having you for a cousin. Too swollen-headed for my taste. He went off, hands in pockets. Julian glared after him. If he wasn't new, I'd shake him till his teeth rattled, he said. Elizabeth was indignant too. What a cheek from a new boy, she said. Well, he won't cheek me. If he does, I'll report him. A bell rang just then, and everyone hurried into a meal. Elizabeth scrambled for her place at the table. She beamed round at everyone. How good it was to be back among all her friends. John Terry grinned at her across the table. Going to help in the garden this term, he called. Have you seen all the seeds that have come up since last term? We shall have a fine show this summer. John was partly responsible for the gardens of the school. He loved gardening and was very good at it. Elizabeth nodded back at him. Yes, of course I'll help. I love messing about in the garden. Elizabeth was going to be busy this term. She meant to ride each day on one of the school ponies. She meant to practice her tennis hard and get into one of the school teams. She meant to help John with the gardens. She was determined to beat Julian as top of the form whenever she could, and that meant a lot of hard work, and she meant to be a good monitor. Somebody else meant to beat Julian too. That was Patrick, his cousin. Patrick was jealous of Julian. He had always been glad when he had heard that his cousin didn't work hard at school, and had continually been bottom. He knew that Julian had good brains, and it pleased him that he hadn't used them. All the same, he hadn't wanted to go to Whiteleaf School. Mixed boys and girls, he thought scornfully. I'd rather go to an all-boys school. Look at that Elizabeth now. Fancy me having to take orders from a girl. Well, I shan't pay much attention to her anyway. He set himself to make a good impression on the others in his form. He entered into everything, and because he was good at games and could be very comical when he tried, he was soon well liked. He hadn't Julian's gift of making extraordinary noises, but how he wished he had. Julian could exactly like a hen laying an egg. He could buzz like a bluebottle fly, drone like a bumblebee, and make strange noises like nothing at all. Patrick had often tried to imitate noises, but he couldn't. For one thing, everyone knew he was making them, and that gave the game away. Nobody ever knows that Julian is doing the noises, thought Patrick enviously. Last Christmas, when he came to us for a party, he imitated a dog whining, and we all hunted round the house for ages, and though I looked and looked at Julian, I couldn't see a single movement of his mouth or throat. Patrick soon found that Whiteleaf wasn't at all the sissy kind of school that he had expected. His class worked hard and played hard. Practically every boy and girl had a hobby, and if anything went wrong, it was reported at the big meeting held by the school each week. This was a kind of parliament at which everything was discussed frankly by the children themselves. Complaints were heard, grumbles were made and set right, money was distributed evenly, plans were made. Rita and William, the head boy and head girl, presided. If punishments had to be meted out, they said what they were to be. 12 monitors sat on a platform with them, a kind of jury, Elizabeth always thought. She was very proud to be on the platform, sitting alongside 12 other monitors. At first, Patrick had been pleased to hear that he was to be in Julian's form. He had frequently heard his father and mother say what a pity it was that a boy with good brains like Julian should so often be bottom. He didn't know that the term before Julian had begun to use his brains well, and could always be on top of the top form if he wanted to be. So it was a shock to find that in the first week marks Julian was top. Elizabeth was second, and he was tied third with somebody else. I thought you made a point of being at the bottom of the form, he said to Julian, or so I always heard. You heard right, said Julian quite amiably. I just didn't happen to want to be on top, that was all, but I do now. Did you want to be on top, Patrick? Bad luck that I happen to be using my brains this term, isn't it? Patrick turned away. All right, he'd work harder still. He wasn't going to play the second fiddle to Julian. He pondered over his tennis. He was good at that. He would take special coaching and practice hard. Julian wasn't much good at tennis. It would do him good to be taken down a peg. Then one day he came up against Elizabeth. She was the only person in the form he didn't try to be nice to. She was Julian's friend and a monitor. That was enough for Patrick. He hardly ever addressed a word to her, and if he ever came up to a group he was with, he walked away. Elizabeth laughed at first, but soon it infuriated her. She longed to pull him up for something, but the chance didn't come for 3 weeks. Then a notice was put on the board for a meeting. Meeting of the garden committee at 5 o'clock sharp, said the notice. All the first form must attend, as volunteers are wanted to help with the weeding. Patrick was in the first form. He saw the notice and ignored it. Why should he go? He wasn't interested in gardening. He hated weeding, and he certainly wasn't going to volunteer to do anything in the gardens. He went off to have a quiet practice by himself, taking his racket and tennis balls with him. There was a wall at the side of the school against which he could hit the balls and strike them continually on the rebound. So when the meeting gathered, Patrick was not there. John, who was in charge, looked round. Are we all here? He said. No, Patrick isn't, said Elizabeth at once. I bet I know where he is too, practising hitting balls against the side wall. I saw him pass the window with his racket. Oh, well, he's got to come, said John. You're a monitor, Elizabeth. Fetch him, will you? Right, said Elizabeth, pleased at being able to make Patrick toe the line for once. I can hear the thud of the balls against the wall now. I'll bring him along at once. And off she went, quite sure she could make Patrick obey her. Right, that's the end of the first chapter. I think it's quite a coincidence that Mr. Morris and Mr. P both came in with a tennis ball and tennis racket, considering our first chapter's all about tennis. Right, I hope you have a lovely day, and I will see you very soon. Bye.